that the items Councilmember Johnny had discussed were sent back to the planning commission for review, just to clarify that.
So you want to make an amendment to it?
Yeah,
Okay, go ahead.
Mr. Mayor, I make an amendment to the minutes at the bottom of it to add the phrase, the items Councilmember Downing had discussed were sent back to the planning commission for review.
Second. Any other discussion?
So, just to clarify, where in the minutes were we?
It is at the bottom of it.
Well, at the bottom of them, we're in adjournment. You mean inside the conversation about, in the public hearing about the ordinance?
Correct. To be at the bottom of that part. The part where we sent stuff back to the planning commission.
Okay, we got first and second. Another discussion. Chris, you have first and second on the amendment? Two of them. Oh, you just want to keep doing a roll, or are we okay? No, I think we're okay with just calling out. Yeah. So that's me, back to me, actually. It's been a long time. Okay, so we have first and second on the amendment. All in favor of the amendment?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, and we have first and second on the original approval of the minutes from June 8th. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, on to approval of the bills with Mr. Plunkett.
Okay, Mr. Mayor, I make a motion. One thing to note is that Bridget caught a double payment in there, so that the bill approval amount is $125 less than the amount listed in the agenda. So I make a motion to approve the bills in the amount of $817,197.84.
Second. Okay, we have first and second. Any other questions on the bills? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, public, now moving to public comments. If there's anybody in the audience that has anything like to talk about? Otherwise, John, did you say there might be somebody?
There's nobody online.
Okay. Okay. Well, as we move on and see Ron's here, Ron Groth's here. He's our city wastewater superintendent. And give us a little presentation on the 2020 CMAR report. Which we will be discussing later on in the meeting.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Good to be back in the council chambers. Seems a little different, so I get like brand new. So, yeah, tonight I'm here to discuss the 2020 CMAR. So that CMAR is a compliance maintenance annual report. It's kind of a report card for our wastewater treatment plant collection system. And I think you'll see the theme of it is pretty much the same as it has been for the last 4 years. So, just if I can remember how to do that.
Oh, you just want it the space bar.
Oh, okay. So, apologize if this is kind of hard to see. Okay. So, pretty much all the subcategories we received maximum score. So no deducts and no points. The one that we have had for the last 4 years has been the influent loading. And that's related to BOD, or it's biochemical oxygen demand. So that's a measure of anything in the water that comes into the plant, either biological or chemical, that uses oxygen. So, and most of it that is biological, anything organic or carbon sourced. Bacteria need oxygen to break that down. As you can see, this is kind of another, this breaks it down by month as to the loadings. And that is in the report that is in your packet too. But what happened was, this was beginning of COVID. So January, February, March we had just come into it of 2020. So January and February for loadings were pretty typical. I mean, just like the year before. March was a little bit lower, but still online. But then from April, we saw the big decline in loadings. The gallons we treated didn't go down so much, but the strength of it did. So the old plant, the old rotor plant, and I'll get into the new plant a little bit. The old rotor plant, you can see the loading, maximum design loading was 3,152 pounds a day of biochemical oxygen. And that was an engineer design. That is what we have to file with the DNR that was worked out back in '79 when this was built as to what the plant could treat. So this is the comparison between the old plant and the new. So you see that 3,000 number, that's the old system. So the new system is 4,798 pounds of BOD per day. That's a 52% increase in plant capacity. And that's designed to take us through 2040. And then next slide, another benefit of this, besides the plant capacity, I mean, when you think about it, we didn't have to add tanks, we just added some equipment to the tanks. It was for $2 million, but it'll buy us another 20 years from what the old system was designed to do. So the other benefit here was some electrical savings. So the bar graph along the bottom shows what we're using so far this June, the first half of the month. That blue line up on top, the COVID numbers last June, loadings were down. We're saving about 10 to 12% over that number. If you go up to the next line up, kind of that orange yellow line there, that's 2 years ago. So that was, basically what we think we'd be seeing, going forward here. And that is, that's a significant savings there. But we saw, in June, we've seen a 10 to 12% savings, but back in March, April, we were actually looking at closer to a 25% savings. And it's a little bit to do with the design of the plant. So the colder the water is, the more dissolved oxygen it can hold. So when this system here uses is an auxiliary submersible mixer. So we can turn down the air and still mix the tank. In the old system, those rotors that delivered the air mixed the tank, so we could only go down so far without the tank settling out on us. So in the long run, as we start up, when it gets the loading increases, we start up another ditch. The electrical savings are going to multiply as we go, especially that turnover point where we're still able to use one ditch with the new system. Where on the old system, we would have had to move to 2 ditches. That's going to be a pretty substantial savings there. So, if you have any questions, I can cover any of the parts of the report. I focused on the BOD loading because that's what we talked about the last 4 years, and that's kind of where our project was geared. So, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
That's our question now. Do you have anything for Ron? Yep, okay.
Yeah, there was a couple of months where we listed under the old standard that we had exceeded that BOD standard.
Yeah.
How much did we exceed that? There was a 90%, 100% threshold. Like at that one time when we exceeded 100%, how much have we exceeded that by?
So the baseline is 3152. So anything over that would be 100% exceedance. And at that point, and I did get into that a little bit last night, I should have brought it up again tonight. So last year, we didn't start the new system till October. So pretty good chunk of last year still fell under that old plant, that old loading. So that 3152 number. So for 2021, that higher, 4,400, 4,500 number will be in effect. So we should see that number back, to no deduction. We won't get to that amount of loading in any month of the year.
What was our peak load that you measured during that 2020 season?
I think that would have been, was it the February loading date? I think still, so it would have been 3,234 pounds.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone has any questions for Ron? No? Okay. Thanks, Ron. I appreciate you. Okay, so close the council hearing and open up a public hearing for liquor license and beer license renewals. Is there anybody in the audience that has anything to say about this? No, so we will close the public hearing and reopen the council hearing, and I will take a motion for the, let's see, we are starting with grant renewals for the combination Class A liquor and Class A beer licenses contingent that all licensing requirements are met at the time of issuance. And this would be for the Dollar General store. Take a motion on that.
Mr. Mayor, I make a motion that we grant renewals to the combination Class A liquor and Class A beer licenses for Dollar General store contingent on all licensing requirements being met at the time of issuance.
Second.
Good. First, second, go ahead, Ms. Morissette.
If I could ask the agent to step forward, Ms. Fry. All right.
Good evening.
Good evening, thanks for appearing tonight. I asked every agent the same three questions, and I'll ask these the same thing of you. Do you understand the role of an agent?
Yes.
Okay. Do you understand that if you're not present and an alcohol-related violation happens, it is your responsibility?
Yes.
Have you taken your responsible server's license?
Yes.
Okay. One of the other questions that I've had for your establishment in the past, or one of the other concerns I've had, has been around the manager being present or the agent being present at that location. I believe in times past, we maybe had a regional type of manager. Are you the local manager?
I am.
Okay, that makes me feel very good. Thank you. Thank you for your time. That's all I have, Mr. Mayor. Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments on this one? No? Okay. So I have first and second on the Class A liquor and Class A beer for Dollar General. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, next we'll go on to the second one, which is a renewal for combination Class B liquor and Class B beer license, contingent on all licensing requirements being met at the time of issuance. And this will be for Bold Burger. I'll take a motion on this.
Mr. Mayor, I make a motion that we grant renewals for the combination Class B liquor and Class B beer license for Gold Burger contingent on all licensing requirements being met at the time of issuance.
Second.
Go ahead.
Just clear, I've already asked the agent
Oh,
this
yeah,
question about 3 times
Yeah.
probably. So, what's changed from the last time we had this application? Could I ask the clerk? I kind of think I understand it here, but maybe just if you could clarify.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Yeah, so for technical purposes, you had to approve the license, and the license that you approved at the last council meeting expires on the 31st, or the 30th of June. And then you'll have to do the renewal that will start on July 1st. So for those purposes,
Got it.
you'll have to do a new approval tonight.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions on this one? Okay. Got a first and second on the renewal of a combination Class B liquor and Class B beer licenses for Bold Burger. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Next we go on to consent agenda. First thing is acknowledgement of the following minutes. Police and Fire Commission from 3:23 and 5:05. River Falls Housing Authority from 5:12. Historic Preservation Commission from 5:12. The Plan Commission from 5:04. Utility Advisory Board from 4:19 and 5:03. The West Central Wisconsin Biosolids from 3:18 and 4:15. River Falls Library Board from 5:03 and the Board of Review from 5:25. And the second thing is a resolution approving the 2020 compliance maintenance annual report. Does anybody want to pull anything? Otherwise, I'll take a motion.
Mr. Mayor, I move we approve the consent agenda, items 4A through H and 5.
Second.
Okay, first and second, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Next, we go on to ordinance resolution. First one is resolution approving general development plan for River Falls Senior Living at 700 South Main Street. I'll take a motion for this.
I make a motion to, approve this, Mr. Mayor.
Second.
First and second, questions? Okay, first and second on a resolution approving the general development plan for fall senior living at 700 South Main Street. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, next is a resolution introducing right-of-way vacation in East Park and Sycamore Streets.
Mr. Mayor, I move we approve the resolution vacating portions of East Park Street and East Sycamore Street.
First and second, questions or comments? Okay. First and second on resolution introducing the right-of-way vacations of East Park and Sycamore Streets. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, next is a resolution approving proactive code enforcement. And I think Community Director maybe give us a little talk to. We'll talk to. Yeah.
Okay, you've been so quiet. This must be what you're waiting for, huh? Good evening. Tonight I'll provide you with a brief overview of the code compliance item before you this evening. Code compliance can be a heavy subject, so here's just a little humor to kick things off. Hopefully you can read that. I'm sorry, but you're in violation of building codes. You can only use sugar-free gum here. Okay, so staff is recommending for your consideration that we change how we approach code compliance in the city. Currently, our approach is primarily reactive, whereby staff responds to complaints, and we're looking for council support to swing the pendulum towards proactive code compliance. This approach doesn't rely on a complaint for staff to act, and typically addresses violations before they become extreme. Violations are addressed equally and unilaterally, and a proactive system results in citizens having the expectation that violations will be addressed. Corrective measures in this approach are usually simpler, less costly, and less time-consuming. Code compliance is a vital component of community development and enhances the overall quality of place for the community. The main goals of code compliance are to reduce blight and motivate property owners to maintain their properties. In order to be effective, code enforcement needs to be strategic. A thoughtful approach to code compliance is consistent and furthers the adopted mission, vision, and values of the city. Consistency, clear direction, and buy-in are crucial for code compliance and staff success. Approval of a code compliance strategy that includes updating city codes, having trained professional code staff, and modernizing the software tools will lead to a more professional approach to code compliance. And council's approval of this strategy will give staff the support and structure they need and will provide consistency that the council and the community expect. Voluntary compliance versus citations is always the goal. Thus, this is not a money-making venture for the city. City staff will work in partnership with residents and businesses to gain compliance while providing a fair and equitable program citywide. This is the chart that was in your packet, so hopefully you've had a chance to take a look at this. In reviewing the violation data over the past 3 years, it shows common cases involve trash, parking in the front yard, RV storage or living in the RV, weeds, furniture in the front yard, unlicensed vehicles. And it also shows that the violations are concentrated in the central parts of the city. The data shows the city has several frequent flyers, and a systematic approach for these habitual violators would be helped by standardizing code compliance methods. The data and discussions with staff indicate a clear need to revise some of the city's property maintenance and nuisance codes for clear interpretation and ease of enforcement. Should council support proactive code enforcement, we've provided a number of implementation recommendations. Included in the attached code compliance manual is a revised process for code compliance, which then also recommends standardizing compliance deadlines of 10 days for all infractions. The process includes a courtesy notice, followed by a notice of violation, then a citation, with the city keeping the ability to abate the nuisance. Zoning code and Title VIII nuisance sections of code can be improved with modifications that will provide consistency in timeframes and approach. Clear interpretations are needed for some of our most frequent nuisance code compliance sections. Consolidating these provisions and ensuring consistency between code sections will assist staff and the public ultimately. At minimum, the code should be amended so that fines are consistent between neighborhood nuisances. Whether those fines should be increased is a policy decision to be considered as we go forward. Implementation would also include code compliance software as part of a larger planning and development software package. This will streamline the notification and citation process, as well as the data collection and reporting that is needed for future staffing, budget, and policy decisions. This software has been on our radar for some time and is proposed in the capital budget. Proactive community education and outreach regarding nuisances and code compliance will be the pillar of the program, as will staff training. So streamlining and modernizing the city's approach to code compliance is necessary to provide the city's citizens and businesses with a clear process and to reduce blight in the community. The main policy decision before you this evening is whether you wish to support the shift from reactive to proactive compliance. If so, there is a resolution in your packet approving such and directing staff to bring forth additional recommended changes that we've discussed this evening. Those changes will then be policy decisions for you at the time they are brought forward. Please know that the approval of the resolution proposed will not flip the switch of change in the community overnight. It will direct staff to make changes that I anticipate will take about a 2-year process. That's all I have for you, Mayor.
Okay.
Our consultant Larry Kirch with Prologue Planning, myself, and Administrator Simpson are available for discussion and questions.
Okay. Let me get a motion on this first, and then we'll see if we have anything.
Mr. Mayor, I move approval of the resolution approving code compliance in the city of River Falls.
Second. Okay, first and second, questions or comments? Yep, Mr. Lonkin? Oh,
Scott, that
All right, I have a comment more than a question, and it's probably naive. I'll just say that right now. Anytime I've ever gotten a call from a citizen who said, geez, I got something next door, you know, they're not cleaning up their yard and so forth. The first question I always ask them is, have you approached your neighbor and talked to them about it? And so I guess my plea is to those residents out there to first make that your first step. Go talk to your neighbor. Now, some of them, this isn't going to work, I realize that, but if I look at the top 3, the parking issues, the grass and weeds, and the nuisance stuff, those are things that could be maybe resolved between neighbors. Maybe find out the neighbor's got something going on that is preventing them from doing it. I don't know, but let's be neighbors first. This, you know, this is going to need to happen because I've gotten enough of these calls. But please reach out to your neighbors first. My naive comment for the people.
Okay. Lonkin?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I remember in the past, the city used to do inspections on rental property for safety, and I think that was Dave that used to do those. As a rental property owner, I found those very valuable for myself in ensuring that my property was safe for people. When we're talking about a code compliance officer here, are we talking about those kind of things that are going to be impacting the safety of residents, or is this more about the city taking on the role of a homeowners association and the city of River Falls essentially becoming like a big HOA for the residents?
Well, I don't review code compliance in that manner. We have codes on the books, and this is simply going to be looking for enforcement of those codes. Regarding the rental piece that you mentioned, state statute changed a few years back, so we no longer have a rental inspection program in the city.
Is Mr. White is finished?
I may come back, but yes, please.
I just, want to compliment staff on bringing this forward. I think that having a clearer, guidelines as to how these things are, implemented, while at the same time giving, staff some more education and flexibility to deal with this is going to be very helpful. It is something that we hear constituents complain about, and there is the perception by some that complying with the code is optional, and that enforcement is arbitrary. And I agree that neither of those things should be true. And I just think having a clear process for this will be very helpful.
Amy, would you agree that having code enforcement is about having standards?
I would agree with that statement, sure.
Thank you. The reason I'm asking that is essentially we have parts of the city that aren't as standardized as other parts. For example, we have some one-way streets, not a lot of them, but because of that, some of those people do park on the yards. So if we're going to be looking at code compliance, we're going to have to be looking at some potential standardization for select areas of the city. Would you agree with that? Because some of those people park on their lawns, so traffic can get through and avoid congestion.
I guess if you have some specific areas as we bring policies forward, we can take a look at that.
So this code here has flexibility to accommodate the needs for those streets, correct?
It could.
Okay.
Anybody else have anything on this?
I have something, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Perry.
So I want to thank Community Development Director Amy Peterson for she responding to some of the questions I had. And just for this, it's a good document, and there's a lot of good information in our packets. And if the public were watching this meeting and have questions, by all means go to the packet and read it, because you're going to learn a little bit more than by even hearing us talk. So I just want to understand, so you're looking at it from a budget standpoint, around 50,000 per year, was that correct? Will you confirm back to me?
Yes, that's what I estimated.
Or at least an initial, when we look at it,
Yes.
including the software. And then as I understood it too, what does this role, this halftime position long-term look like in terms of, will they be the lead on the proactive approach? Or will some of this be shared with our current code enforcement officer?
So right now, what we're looking at is the 0.5 FTE being split between two positions. We have a new staff person coming on that will lead the proactive approach, and then will be assisted potentially by our community development assistant. Our current code compliance officer is also our building inspector. And if you may recall, back in 2015, we used to have two building inspectors. At that point, we went down to one. With development running as high as it has been in the past, he's been very busy just doing inspections at this point. So he's backing off of code compliance, and it'll be handled by alternate staff.
Thank you. No, that's really helpful. And I just want to say too, you answered my question in terms of training, because I think long-term as we look at this, proactive approach is going to be really incumbent upon the person who is the face, if you will, making the first contact, that they can do so in a really professional, polite manner. And I don't have any reason to think that wouldn't continue to happen, but I just think we need to reinforce that, because the minute you start walking onto someone's property and asking them questions about their property, done in the wrong way, it can instantly create a situation which could have been avoidable had, I'll just say, better people skills were used. So I'm excited to see that training is going to be part of this program too. And also thank you on pointing me towards weeds and what a weed is and what a weed is not, because I've had friends who have dandelions and say, it's natural prairie grass. Well, not exactly.
And so that's helpful, because I know those things will occasionally come up, and that's probably what some of the other council members get questions about. I just want to thank you again for answering and for all the time you put into this. This looks great.
You're welcome. Anybody else? First,
One second.
Yep. Okay.
So going back to my question, when you say it could, now, is that something where if you run into, how do I put this? If there is traffic congestion and it is a one-way street, you know, if you go down there and do code compliance, now it's potentially gonna have problems. You do have the legal flexibility in this to say, you know what, for now, we're gonna leave it right. There's some common sense, right?
So there's a couple different approaches. You can do code compliance and make areas specific to places like you're speaking of, and direct them specifically. I don't know that we'd go that route. I don't know that we have specific examples, but we will train our code enforcement officers to be reasonable, right? They need to be. So if there are situations where the code just can't be enforced, then we'll look at options with the property owner, and the folks that are there, so.
So you're saying it does have flexibility in the code to do that?
Can.
Okay. Thank you.
We're really looking for an equitable process, right? So we were looking to be consistent across the city so that all community members are treated the same. With that, we do need to have some flexibility.
Right. But as I understand it, though, we're still going to have some input into this.
Into the changes that are coming forth, yes.
Right. So to Sean, your point, I think we're going to have a chance to talk through some of that.
Anybody else?
Yeah, so I guess I want to clarify, and I appreciate the presentation by the community development director, that this is the first step in our minds of, we acknowledge that we have reactive code enforcement. We're acknowledging that given the current workload of community development staff, even reactive code enforcement currently is inconsistent at best, as far as the time it takes to get actions taken, letters sent, knocking on doors and getting to people, because it hasn't been a priority to do any of the proactive, except for, as indicated in the memo, we did some kind of piloting at the request of the community development director to say, well, what would it look like if we did proactive? How could we divide the city? Let's try it with existing staff and focus on maybe the top one or two things. At the time, that we were consistently getting complaints on weeds and parking on lawns and things. So that gave us the understanding that, you know, certainly we can move down that path, and it gave us a little bit better idea of what kind of time we required to do that. I want to reiterate what the community development director said is we're definitely not flipping a switch here. We do not have the resources to do that. So if tomorrow there was 150 complaints, and even if it was already in our existing code, we would have a very difficult time to do that. We're certainly not getting the clipboards ready to go out on an inspection tour. We don't have a list of properties we can't wait to get to. So we needed to understand from the council, and we wanted to provide you more of a comprehensive look at kind of what it would be, even though we didn't know if you were ready to kind of make that move. But a half FTE as proposed is not going to be akin to any kind of HOA. Now, if we were to get to 2 FTE or 3 FTE doing code enforcement for falls, and the planning commission and the council really spent a lot of time adding a lot of things to our code, it could start to look, you know, for lack of a better analogy, it could look a lot more like an HOA in some communities, although I don't think our HOAs are really aggressive here in Falls. But I think I understand your point. At what point does this go from just trying to do the health, welfare, and safety of the community to this is how it's got to be in River Falls? You know, if you chose to live here, that's how you have to live. And so we're a long ways from that. Our code doesn't contain a lot of direction for how people should live or use their property. It's got some real rough outlines, and there'll be a couple, you know, as we've indicated, our estimates, a couple of years working through some of this to decide how far the council and the planning commission want to determine that. Even to the extent of looking at our existing ordinances, you know, let's say 6 inches of grass well, is that you may have a recommendation from staff that the new standard is 9 inches, right? That it's okay if it's a little bit longer now. Or it may come back and say, you know, a lot of communities are saying 4 inches is the appropriate level. And so, I don't want to get too far in the weeds. But, there's a long view here, and we do not have the current resources to ramp up quickly. So we appreciate the council giving us direction about if you want us to start warming up the engine, so to speak, and getting going. But even if you tell us, yep, this resolution's good and we want you to get started, as we outlined, there's only one area in the recommendations that can be done without formal action by a further body. And that's kind of the internal processing and how many days it takes to get a letter from one person to the other and what system we use. The rest of it will require notices of public hearing and ordinance changes and language. And we certainly have a lot of work to do, I think, on making sure that we feel that we understand the implications for municipal court beyond just our code enforcement staff. Like, how does that get to the court and how does it come back? And the whole fine issue, because there's this belief that citations and fines somehow create revenue for the city, but every citation we write is going to cost us money. You know, the fine recovery or the court recovery is infinitesimally small compared to the cost of doing it. It is about setting what we think are kind of bare minimum standards for the community. That's what we want to emphasize. So I think 2 years is optimistic, but I think it's doable. And certainly you have a say in how much you want to push us. There'll be items in the CIP and in the operating budget that will either give us the ability to go faster or slower based on their approval. So even if it's not formally, you know, an action, first public hearing and change an ordinance, there'll be the other actions like getting the budget approval and the CIP approval that'll tell us whether we can kind of afford to swing the pendulum, so to speak. So I think it gives us a good outline, and I was highly skeptical given our current workload and some of my professional leanings, but I think this gives you a good opportunity to say, and probably recognizing what the community's been telling us for a while is we need to move the bar a little bit on this. And the rental, we can't answer the question of what happens if we would have rental inspections still. Because it may be that this whole discussion we're having right now would be delayed another 5 years or 10 years because we would feel like the rental program is taking care of most of the properties. But we have plenty of owner occupied properties that get complaints on them and are problems. So even though I think rental inspection program could assist us in managing some of this, it's not a good option for us under the current case law that I see. I'd rather let other cities get sued first and see how that goes. Which a few of them have decided to line up and see how it goes. So we'll watch. I think is it Eau Claire and Oshkosh, and see how their rental inspection kind of reinvigoration of the rental inspection program goes, and how the courts decided that's contrary to state law or not. That'd be my recommendation to the council. So this is a good way for us to get at some basic nuisance and code enforcement things in a more fair way. Because right now, if your neighbor doesn't like that you're not in code compliance, they can trigger the process. And if your neighbor doesn't mind, then there is no process triggered, which some would say is fair. Others would say is inherently unfair. And I think staff generally agrees with the latter sentiment that when you're losing the lottery of a picky neighbor is not really a fair and equitable way to run city code compliance.
Yeah, Mr. Plunkett.
What range of codes in the city code could this position be potentially used for? So if a future council passed a code prohibiting the use of herbicides and pesticides on people's lawns, or if a future council asked it to be a code violation to not properly return a damage deposit to a renter. Could this officer be used to protect the interests of the citizens and protect the code through enforcing those violations?
Yeah, I don't know of any legal prohibition on, if it's a violation of city ordinance, I suspect they could do it just like we have it's in our PSC rules, or if it's an ordinance, I believe it's an ordinance related to even on watering. I mean, so theoretically, you have an ordinance that says you can only water every other day. If the council felt it was vitally important to enforce that ordinance proactively, they would do that. So again, I think that may be a good distinction here, is we're not saying 0.5 FTE gets us proactive code enforcement on every city ordinance. As we've debated a few times, current police FTE doesn't give you 100% proactive enforcement on speeding or other violations. You put a level of effort that helps set a community standard and be a deterrent for those. And what council members have often said, we need more FTE, more effort on that. So just like on what the examples you're giving, you're talking about a pretty small amount of resources. The effort is going to be based on whatever the council and the community said is a priority for enforcement.
Just to chime in a little bit, Councilmember Plunkett, the city has pretty broad discretion to determine who's going to enforce its codes, and as you know, what those codes are going to say and how to prioritize that. So yes, down the road, if there's different codes regarding pesticides or herbicides, that's something that could be enforced, but that would be at the discretion of the council at the time, how they want to prioritize the enforcement in the city.
Thank you.
Anybody else have anything? Okay, first and second resolution approving the proactive code enforcement. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Okay, next go on to the comptroller's report.
The comptroller's report for May 2021. General fund revenues through the end of May were $5,067,836, or 44% of budgeted revenues. Revenues in the month of May included $49,000 in donations for the fire safety trailer, and I understand we have almost $100,000 in hand. Expenditures for the same period were $3,850,080, or 34% of expenses, as of the end of May 31st. Net revenues over expenditures were $1,217,748.
Thank you, Ms. Levine. Okay, next I got a quick proclamation I'd like to read. So whereas City of River Falls strives to be an inclusive community, an employer of choice, as part of our efforts to be a distinct, vibrant, and safe place for people of different backgrounds to call home. And whereas in 2007, the City Council resolved to make inclusiveness a fundamental aspect and everyday priority of our community. And whereas the month of June has been recognized as Pride Month throughout the nation since 1999. And whereas celebrating Pride Month influences awareness and is an opportunity to engage in dialogue to strengthen alliances and continually build understanding and acceptance. And whereas the City of River Falls is honoring Pride Month to support, recognize, and celebrate the contributions and diversity of our LGBTQ+ members of our community. Now therefore, I, Mayor Dan Plone, the City of River Falls, do hereby proclaim the month of June 2021 to be Pride Month in the City of River Falls and authorize the Pride flag to be flown at City Hall through the end of this month as a sign of our commitment to celebrating diversity and prioritizing inclusivity. Given on my hand and seal of the City of River Falls, this 22nd day of June 2021. Then I have a couple appointments I'd like to make. Both go to the Utility Advisory Board. I'd like to reappoint Mr. Tim Thune through May of 2024 and make a new appointment of Mark Westphal to serve remainder of term through May of 2022.
I move approval of your appointments, Mr. Mayor.
Second.
All in favor of the appointments? Aye. Opposed? Okay.
To adjourn.
All in favor of adjourning?
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned. Thanks, everybody. Good to be back. Good to be back.